everybody, welcome to What the Flick. Ben, Matt, Alonso, I don't know where I'm pointing now. So there was a piece in the New York Times about how Rotten Tomatoes is the death of cinema or something. And since Matt is the former editor-in-chief of Rotten Tomatoes.
Sorry, not sorry.
We thought we'd talk about what the hell that was all about. I love the idea that suddenly critics wield this mighty power that can bring down blockbusters, because they only unpack that when something bombs and they need somebody to blame, because God knows there's plenty of movies that critics hate that make plenty of money.
It couldn't possibly be at all that maybe this summer a lot of the big movies sucked.
Yes. It's like, what other reason were people not flocking to see Baywatch? It has to be the critics' fault.
So Brett Ratner said, he was at a film festival, he said, I think it's the destruction of our business. And that was sort of the first quote that they used in the
the bloodstained hand points a finger.
But what I think it's, I'll be devil's advocate here, you guys know better. But like, there's some nuance to it, right? I mean, of course, look, good movies find their way to an audience, especially if there's a good movie and a big budget and a big marketing campaign. I find it very hard to believe that then it's by its nature critics proof. If it's good, the critics will like it, right? Their argument only holds up if you say it is a good movie, the critics were wrong, right? Because if the critics like it and it's good, well then it fuels it, and if you get a 92 on Rotten Tomatoes, then it can help drive your business.
I mean, and obviously what they're pointing to now is you have sites like Fandango and a lot of these sort of ticket selling sites posting the tomato meter number next to the title. So if you're about to click on, the Emoji Movie and you see that it has a 7, you might think, maybe my entertainment dollar could be best spent somewhere else.
That jumped out at me in the piece, that if I'm Fandango, and I know Fandango which is owned by Universal, right? Or NBC Universal, right? Yeah. And Fandango, I mean, it's owns 75% of Rotten Tomatoes, so NBC Universal sort of owns 75% of Rotten Tomatoes. You could look at it that way, right?
Warner Brothers used to.
And Warner Brothers.
When I first started there, 20th Century Fox or Fox Digital did.
Yeah. So I wouldn't do that in my ticket selling wing. I wouldn't put the tomato meter score there. I get that they want to. Their thought is, well, this is also our division.
It's synergy.
It's synergy, right? But I would leave that off. But that's their call, right?
iTunes started doing that. Apple started doing that with iTunes 8 years ago, right?
Doing what?
Putting the
tomato meter
the tomato meter on their iTunes movie stores, right? So every movie you'd have the tomato meter, and even at the time it was like, well, it'd be interesting to see what the sales data is like. We never saw it, but if the sales data was affected by whether or not a movie did better or worse according to critics. Now, one of the things, there's this great study that a guy named Eric Lundegaard did in Slate about 6 years ago that said that per screen averages tend to be higher for movies that get good reviews. So there's a correlation, maybe not a causal relationship, but there's a correlation between audiences and critics. Now, I say audiences, I don't say fans, right? Fans go to the first weekend. Fans will go the first weekend, fine, right? You wanna go see a movie, go see that movie. I always say that. But the people that are on the fence, the casual watcher, like, I don't know about this particular Baywatch movie, and you catch it on cable or you take a chance on it. 9 times out of 10, the way most of the audience is gonna feel about that they weren't invested in it is gonna line up with kind of where critics are.
Right.
And
critics aren't. Yeah. So but the subtlety is the subtlety in this is that maybe there is a somewhat valid point about the decision that Rotten Tomatoes made whenever it started about the lack of subtlety and nuance.
Right, exactly.
Ultimately, there is just simply a yes or no.
Yeah, because it is this binary. So I know a lot of times if a movie that I'm sort of like about, but I'm in a positive direction, then it's a fresh tomato. But it's not like an unqualified rave. Whereas there are movies that I'm sort of like, and it becomes a rotten. But again, it's not like a total.
Because I will say, that's something that you and I have talked about before. Where I ended up coming around on this, and partly because I had to, was, but really, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask you to take a stand on a movie. Right, I don't think, does this movie fulfill its promise? Like, I don't, yes, I understand.
There are a lot of stands to take.
I understand that it's reductive, but where that's why we point people to the whole review, right? I'm still there. That's why the site still insists on being able to link to the full review so that people can read the whole thing. The tomato meter is just the entry point. It's just a
I got it,
it's a survey.
But it is.
Hear me out. I understand that it is ubiquitous, but I think that it is ubiquitous in a way that arguably Siskel and Ebert weren't ever quite ubiquitous. And I think that there's an audience. It's not like, you talked about how critics, like studios think that critics wield this level of power. It's not like people were watching Pauline Kael go at it with other people in New York. Like that was making headline news about movies.
She and John Simon kind of, but I know what you mean. There is something about the aggregate where it's like, any one critic doesn't maybe have the clout that somebody like Pauline Kael or Siskel and Ebert used to, but as an aggregate now, this number does have that.
Also, let me put it this way. Sure. I think that the aggregate is reaching an audience that otherwise, for the most part, probably wouldn't be paying attention anyway.
I would be really interested in whether the aggregate, let's presume that I become president and I ban motorcycles and I mandate a scoring system for rating movies. So really my first couple of days in office.
Okay. First 100 days.
Yeah, first 100 days. And one of those is, hey, you guys are just gonna use the 10-point system and every critic is gonna lose their ability to write or broadcast unless they use this system.
So Metacritic, basically.
Right.
And your thought experiment, somebody's done that and they're not as popular.
Okay, they're not as popular, but also how different are the numbers? I'd be very curious. I bet, my hunch is there'd be some distinction, and an 82% Rotten Tomato number might be 76, but I bet they're not that far off, and it would ultimately dispel. I mean, first of all, it's impossible to do because everybody scores it differently. You read A.O. Scott, and you're like, I don't know whether he gave this an 8 or a 6.8. I can't tell. You just decide you liked it, right? So I get why it's done, but it does. It is a fair point. It was the exact same fair point with Siskel and Ebert, or as I like to call it, Mankiewicz and Lyons. I think most of I think most of the country does too.
No, really, it's Lemire and Vishnevetsky.
That's right.
Yes,
right.
Please.
Come on.
It's the same argument, exactly the same. They did the exact same thing, right? I mean, it's either
the binary,
right? It's either up or down, and that I'm sure is frustrating. It is our obsession with numbers and round numbers that you guys picked 60%, right? You could have picked 65%. You could have picked 55%. Right. You could. Right.
And to be clear, it wasn't me. Right. I didn't
It's all existed by the time you got there.
It all existed by the time I was there.
Right. And so, and theoretically, you could make. I'm sure that studios have been like, hey, look, 53% of people liked it. Why are you not saying it's fresh? More people like it than don't like it.
Because that would be mixed reviews, right? And we all know from covering movies and talking about it, like, oh, it got mixed reviews.
What about
like mixed reviews
equals not good?
Equals like,
Well, but could there be a thing? I mean, I'm sure you guys had when you were there. There was a conversation of fresh, rotten, or mixed between 50 and 60, right?
Like soft to the touch,
right?
But because this is a system, now you have the studios trying to game the system. Like I heard now that the thing that they do is for horror movies, they'll sort of show them at a festival where they know it's going to get a bunch of good reviews 6 months before it opens, so that the number will be high for a long period of time going into the actual release, and then once it gets shown to a broader swath of critics, if it doesn't do as well, they'll at least go into it with an 80% or whatever.
Yeah, that kind of works in the festival system, but that works less because the later reviews still are independent, right? It doesn't really. I have
been approached by studios asking me to change my thing because I was on the border. I have seen movies that I didn't get into, but certain other handpicked critics did get into because they knew they were going to get good reviews out of them. So like there's the studios are already trying to manipulate, or they have been and will continue to try and manipulate these results to their favor. So again, it's like the people who, back when I used to read the comments for What the Flake, which I stopped doing because some of y'all know what you did. People get so obsessed about the numbers and like you gave this science fiction movie a different number than you gave this drama film, and it's like there's not an empirical scale at play here. It's all from the gut. It's all about, compared to other films of its kind, compared to what its ambitions were versus what its results were. And that number tends to be meaningless. And ultimately the tomato meter is meaningless. Find critics that you like and agree with and read them regularly and see what they think. Or find critics that you hate and disagree with regularly and read them and do the opposite. But don't just rely on these digits to tell you what the movie is.
So the last thing I want to say about this is that in a parallel universe where Rotten Tomatoes doesn't exist, right? Because if you
that'd be great,
right?
Baywatch would have still failed.
I don't know what I would have done, but if critical sentiment lines up with audience sentiment, then the reason that the studios don't like Rotten Tomatoes is that news about, they can't hide a bad movie, right? They just can't. They can't hide a bad movie past the second night, past Thursday night, right? So in that world where Rotten Tomatoes doesn't exist, all of these articles that happened all summer are about Twitter.
Yeah,
No, seriously.
Right.
That's right.
Oh my God, audience sentiment. Oh, we got to kill Twitter.
Yeah,
we got to stop people tweeting about movies. That's absolutely what it would be, because
So to that point,
again, God forbid, studio people greenlight good movies.
Yeah.
So
and they certainly are the first to tell you how high their tomato meter number is when it's good.
Nobody complains. I will say this. 10
when
years
they're
of experience,
certified fresh.
Nobody complains when they got a good
So
score.
here's the right from the article to that point. Paramount's Baywatch bombed after arriving to a tomato meter score of 19. Percentage of reviews the movie received that the site considered positive, just 36 out of 191. Doug Kreutz, media analyst at Cowen Company, wrote of the film in a research note, quote, "Our high expectations appear to have been crushed by a 19 Rotten Tomatoes score. It is almost impossible for me to believe that if Rotten Tomatoes didn't exist, if it was just a system, because nobody's saying ban critics. Brett Ratner doesn't, well, he may have. But I mean, if it was just, whatever happened 10 years ago, wonder how long Rotten Tomatoes been around?
20 years.
So 21 years ago, if you just read the reviews, that Baywatch would have been a runaway hit. That to me defies logic.
Right.
That guy's research note does not seem well
The
researched.
problem is, what it really is that now you get maybe opening night as opposed, or not even opening night anymore, because yes, advanced reviews can hurt a movie that relies on a fan base that is not invested the way, say, Batman fans are. But
or Adam Sandler fans.
Or Adam Sandler
He certainly
fans.
never relied on
But
good reviews.
What it used to be is that you could open a shitty movie with a big marketing budget and get a couple weeks, because it would take, we didn't have social media, it would take a couple weeks for word to get out. People had to read newspapers, or people would go to the movie and then call their friends or talk to their friends. Oh yeah, I saw Red Heat and it's terrible. Don't go see Red Heat.
Right.
I saw Raw Deal, the Schwarzenegger.
Right.
I'm picking old action movies, right? Raw Deal had a huge marketing budget. It was supposed to be this next, written by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you go and see it and you're like, oh, right? And so what happens is that it takes a couple weeks for that to really tank.
For the Time magazine review to come out.
So, but then how do we explain away? How did they explain away? How would you explain their attempt to not explain away? I think I'm pretty clear here. Hitman's Bodyguard and the Emoji Movie that do well and have really low scores. Like, that seems to fly in the face of their argument. Obviously, it can happen anyway.
Because kids don't care.
Right, kids don't care. Right.
And parents want to take their kids to something, anything.
But Hitman's Bodyguard is not for kids.
No, and Ryan Reynolds and Sam Jackson pull enough of an audience that people will go see them in an R-rated action movie.
Yeah, they released that movie at a time of year where there wasn't much of anything else, and like if it's August and you've already seen Dunkirk and Wonder Woman and Spider-Man or whatever else, you're like, well, I like Ryan Reynolds and Sam Jackson, why not?
And I don't have any empirical evidence here, but I imagine that word of mouth for a movie is not dissimilar from your neighbors telling you who to vote for. It's still the most an incredibly valuable thing. If everybody in your workplace says
word of mouth is the best marketing.
Emoji movie
And that's what
hilarious.
Twitter is.
That's what Twitter is. Yeah.
Right, and that's why the most important thing you can do in an election, if you want to see someone like Donald Trump defeated, is talk to your friends. More valuable than almost anything else. All right, thanks everybody.